I am always very fair and always very nice to people.
Stupid idiot. You're fucking moron.
I am always very fair and always very nice to people. All I wanted to say was, you're an evil piece of shit. Mr. Pikachu here believes that, I am always very fair and always very nice to people. Pain? It hurts my brain. It makes me feel like giving up on human civilization. In my past, during my activism here on YouTube, I have supported and voiced these views. Everyone is free to believe in whatever they believe. But then again, it also makes sense that we should maybe ban Islam. But then again, it also makes sense that we should maybe ban Islam. But then again, it also makes sense that we should maybe ban Islam.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Defense Podcast. Today we're back with Mr. Apostate Prophet. In case you're new to the channel, I've made a playlist where I'm refuting all the reason why Ridwan, aka Apostate Prophet, left Islam. He gave 22 reasons so far, so I have refuted 3 of them. So in this video, I'll be discussing his 4th reason as to why he left Islam, which is the Prophet's marriage with Aisha. In his 22 reason video, he doesn't really go into much details. However, he made a separate video on Aisha radhiyallahu anha, where he explains his position better. So let's take a look at what he has to say.
Apparently, calling 50-year-old men who marry 6-year-old children pedophiles is not accepted in Europe any longer. Muhammad married a 6-year-old, and he had sex with her when she was 9, and he was in his 50s. If he lived today, we would all call him a pedophile for what he did. You can say it with me if you can't raise your voice. You should say it. Muhammad was a pedophile. And I will say this now, and I would say this in Europe and anywhere else.
Now, let's deal with this pedophile claim first. Let's take a look and see what exactly constitutes a pedophile.
According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, pedophile is one affected with pedophilia. Pedophilia is a psychiatric disorder in which an adult has sexual fantasies about, or engages in sexual acts with a prepubescent child. A prepubescent child is one who has not reached puberty yet.
In order for someone to be a pedophile, they need to be attracted to prepubescent children. Now, was Prophet Muhammad ﷺ attracted to prepubescent children? Was Aisha radhiyallahu anha a prepubescent child? The answer is no, because Aisha radhiyallahu anha herself says in this hadith, narrated Aisha, I had seen my parents following Islam since I attained the age of puberty. Not a day passed, but the Prophet visited us both in mornings and evenings. You can read about this in Sahih al-Bukhari 476. Now, if you notice carefully, it says the Prophet came to visit us, meaning that this hadith is taking place long before the marriage was consummated or marriage happened. And she moved in with the Prophet. So this hadith basically takes place before she moved in with the Prophet. So this clear cut shows that she reached puberty either before the marriage or before the marriage was consummated. Now, based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Apostate Prophet's theory, Prophet Muhammad was a pedophile because he consummated the marriage with Aisha at the age of 9. Premise 2. If we find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see that in order for someone to be a pedophile, they have to be attracted to a prepubescent girl. We see that in the hadith of Bukhari 476, Aisha radhiyallahu anha reached puberty before the marriage was consummated, which contradicts Apostate Prophet's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Apostate Prophet's theory about Prophet Muhammad being a pedophile is proven false. Prophet Muhammad was not a pedophile since Aisha radhiyallahu anha reached puberty before the consummation took place.
4th issue is Aisha's age. I made a video about this whole topic. You can watch it either right now, or after this video. That's one of my favorite videos so far, by the way. So I won't take your time to explain it in this video because it is all there in the other video. Have fun watching it. A short version is Muhammad married a little girl and had sex with her.
This is a lie. There is a hadith where Aisha radhiyallahu anha herself said that girls who reach the age of 9 have reached maturity. That means that they are not little girls anymore. The hadith says, and I quote, Sayyidah Aisha said, when a girl is 9 years old, she is a woman, meaning she has attained puberty. You can read about this in Tirmidhi. The hadith number is 1109. This same hadith has also been attributed to the Prophet with a weak isnad. When a girl reaches 9 years of age, she is a woman. You can read about this in Irwa al-Ghalil by Sheikh Albani, volume number 1, page number 199. Now, to be fair, both of this hadith has been graded as weak because it has a weak chain or a broken chain. However, the reason why I believe this is something Aisha radhiyallahu anha herself believed is because this is not the only place where she said something similar to this. There is actually a hadith in Bukhari where she says something similar. She says in that hadith, the people who used to carry me on the camel came to my howdah and put it on the back of the camel, thinking that I was in it, as at that time women were light in weight and thin and lean, and did not used to eat much. So those people did not feel the difference in the heaviness of the howdah while lifting it, and they put it over the camel. At that time, I was a young lady. You can read about this in Sahih al-Bukhari, 2661. Now, this is a long hadith. However, if you notice, I actually quoted this hadith before. However, I noticed something very interesting here. In this hadith, Aisha radhiyallahu anha was being carried on howdah on the back of a camel. By the way, in case you don't know what a howdah is like a box, a covered box, I think, where people used to sit, like on top of either an elephant or a camel back in the day, like in ancient times. But anyway, so the howdah used to be covered with sheets usually, so that people can comfortably, ride on a camel or an elephant. Anyway, so she missed her ride back home on her camel. The people thought that she was in her howdah and carried an empty howdah, thinking that she was in it. The reasoning for that was that back then, women used to be very light. Also, she probably had other things in there. So they probably thought that she was in the howdah and carried an empty howdah, thinking that she is in it. Now, according to Aisha radhiyallahu anha, she very specifically says, at that time, women were light in weight, which means she considered herself a woman. Now, later in the hadith, a servant describes Aisha radhiyallahu anha as an immature girl. She says, Buraida said, no, by Allah, who has sent you with the truth, I have never seen her anything fully except that she is a girl of young, immature age. By the way, there is a mistake in the translation here. The word girl of immature age is actually not here. In the Arabic, the hadith simply says that she is a girl of young age, or she is a young girl. Now, from this hadith, we can conclude two things. One, Aisha radhiyallahu anha was not a child, since she herself describes herself as a woman. Two, she was also not an adult, since Buraida was an older woman, and she describes her as a young girl, which means she is neither a child nor a full adult, but somewhere in between, meaning she was a teenager. Now, the reason why she describes herself as a woman can be explained by the hadith in Sheikh Albani's book, which is also in Tirmidhi, where Aisha radhiyallahu anha says that when a girl reaches 9 years of age, she's a woman. So we can see both the weak hadith and the Sahih hadith confirms the same thing. Not just that, even many non-Muslim historians also say the same thing. In an article, The Cuteness of the Avant-Garde, the literary critic C.N. Nye points out that of human history, children or teens were seen as miniature adults. It's only recently in the 1500 to 1800 did we start to think of children as naive or innocent due to various different changes. There's a great video on YouTube on the channel Wisecrack in regards to this, which inshallah I'll link below. Now, this practice of thinking kids as adults was so common that before the coming of Imperial Rome, girls were deemed for marriage when they first started their menstruation. Now, according to the law of Augustus of Rome, 18 BC and 9 AD, it declared that girls must be at least 10 to 12 years of age when they get married. Not just that, according to the Catholic Church and their most authoritative texts, Decretum Grantianae, it was written by the jurist Johannes Gratian in the 12th century. It set the minimum age for marriage but not consummation, and the age of marriage was 7 years old for boys and girls. Now imagine that, they're upset about her being married at 6. Here the Catholic Church is allowing marriage at the age of 7. But anyway, so the age for consummation of the marriage was set to near 12. So as we can clearly see, Aisha radiallahu anha, thinking herself as a woman, even though she was technically a teenager, was not abnormal. It was completely normal in the medieval world. The idea of childhood back then meant up to puberty. Then you're considered a man or a woman, though you were still technically a teen. Based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan's theory, Prophet Muhammad married a little girl and had sex with her. Premise 2. If you find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see that in the Hadith of Tirmidhi 1109 and the Hadith in Irwa al-Galil by Sheikh Albani and the Hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari 2661 that Aisha radiallahu anha herself called herself an adult at the age of 9 or 12. We also see the same in the history of Catholic Church and the Roman Empire, which contradicts Ridwan's theory of her being a little girl, since the definition of little girl or child was different in the 6th century. Conclusion. Therefore, Ridwan's stupid theory about Prophet marrying a little girl and having sex with her is proven false. Basically, Ridwan is committing the equivocation fallacy. He is taking the word little girl, which has two different meanings in two different time periods, and try to make it seem like it only has one meaning in both places in his argument, even though the word little girl or child meant something completely different in the 6th century medieval period. Basically, he is making his argument completely misleading. Either way, let's continue.
3. It was normal back then to marry young girls. Why don't we focus on now? Well, maybe. It was normal to make marriages in order to strengthen bonds with other people, with other allies and friends and whatnot. It was probably not such a normal thing to marry such young girls. And this one, Buraira, a companion of Muhammad, says, I cannot accuse her of any defect, except that she is still a young girl who sleeps, neglecting her family's dough, which the domestic goats come to eat. Well, the emphasis is on except that she is still a young girl. So it was probably not such a normal thing if we look at this quote.
Here he is committing the cherry-picking fallacy. If you notice, he just quoted the same hadith I quoted. What's ironic is that he completely ignores what the hadith says earlier and only highlights what Buraida said about Aisha radiallahu anha. Also, young girl doesn't mean a child. Not to mention, in the same hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha herself calls herself a woman. She says, the people who used to carry me on the camel came to my howdah and put it on the back of the camel, thinking that I was in it. As at that time, women were light in weight and thin and lean, and did not used to eat much. So those people did not feel the difference in the heaviness of the howdah while lifting it. So what happened, Ridwan? Did this quote from Aisha radiallahu anha just vanish into thin air? So here she clearly calls herself a woman. Based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan's theory, Aisha radiallahu anha was a young child because in Sahih Bukhari 2661, Buraida calls her a young girl. Premise 2. If we find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see that in the same hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha called herself a woman. Also, a young girl doesn't mean a child. A teenager or an adult can also be called a young girl, which contradicts Ridwan's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Ridwan's theory about Aisha radiallahu anha being a young child is proven false. Also, Ridwan actually contradicts himself here because he's saying that it was probably not normal, but before in the video, he admitted that Aisha radiallahu anha was already engaged with someone when she was 6.
Aisha bint Abu Bakr, or Aisha, was the daughter of Abu Bakr. When she was at the age of 6, she was betrothed to a person called Jubair in Mutim. But the betrothal was cancelled.
Now, if this is the case that Aisha radiallahu anha's marriage with the Prophet was abnormal at the age of 6, then why was she already engaged with someone else? I mean, why would her parents allow this if this is so abnormal? I think it's a valid question to ask. Also, why is it that the Catholic Church allowed boys and girls to be married at the age of 7? Were they also pedophiles? I think the answer is obvious. It was normal back then for people to marry early.
Also, it was normal then, so it's no issue. Well, is Muhammad not the prophet of God? Is he not the perfect human? Is he not the perfect example for Muslims? Doesn't the Quran support him as a perfect example for Muslims multiple times? Does the Quran not say that he is a great person of great moral character and that he is an example for Muslims? There has certainly been for you in the Messenger of Allah an excellent pattern for anyone whose hope is in Allah and the last day and remembers Allah often. Or in this verse, and indeed you are of a great moral character. This is directed to Muhammad himself. Well, of great moral character, no.
Here, Ridwan is committing the non-sequitur fallacy. Whether someone is moral or not has nothing to do with the age of their bride. Mahatma Gandhi married his wife, Kasturba Gandhi, at the age of 14. Does that now mean that Mahatma Gandhi was now a pedophile and an immoral man? Of course not. Rabindranath Tagore, a Nobel Prize winning poet from India, married his wife Mrinalini Devi, a girl at the age of 10 in India when he was 22. Does that now mean that he was an immoral man, a pedophile? Does that now mean that we should now reject all his poems and songs and stories? Does that mean that we should take his Nobel Prize away? You can read about this in Selected Letters of Rabindranath Tagore by Krishna Datta and Andrew Robinson. You can also read about this in Rabindranath Tagore, The Myriad-Minded Man by Krishna Datta and Andrew Robinson. The word immoral means not conforming to accepted standards of morality. But the thing is that the accepted standards of morality back in 6th century Arabia was that there was nothing wrong with marrying a girl who has reached puberty, who were 6 or 7 years old, or 9 years old, when the marriage gets consummated. So what the Prophet did was not immoral by any definition. Also, the Prophet was never sexually attracted to Aisha before she reached puberty. There's simply no evidence for this. Now, obviously, the counter argument would be that, just as Ridwan says, that, well, just because people did it back in the day doesn't mean it's right. Here, they're conflating the past with the present, and in certain sense, but rejecting it in other senses. Basically, they're being a hypocrite. They're accepting the fact that past and present is not the same thing in one sense, but rejecting it completely in another sense. Let me explain. For example, let me ask you this: what is the rate of the child death now versus what was the rate of child death back then? I mean, what is the mortality rate now versus back then? There's a research data on our World in Data which shows that life expectancy of modern times versus the past. Here in this map, you can clearly see that people back in 18th century did not expect to live beyond the ages of 25 to 30. Now, there's a bar which shows that the more you go back, the shorter people's life become. Now, let me ask you something. Is 2019, where the life expectancy is for the most part above 70 to 80 years, the same as the life expectancy of 18th century, where the average life expectancy was from 25 to 30 years? Are they the same thing? If you say yes, then let me ask you, why do you use modern medicines that was invented after 18th century? Why do you use computers and cell phones that was invented later? I mean, if they're the same thing, then why are you using things that didn't exist back in 18th century? I mean, if they're not the same, and if you say that if they're not the same, then why would the same morality be applicable in the past? Why would the same morality be applicable in all places? I mean, if the context is not the same, then why won't you apply the same logic on morality, which is always developing in a secular non-religious sense? Based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan, it doesn't matter if people back then did something. for the historical context of the time. It's still bad because morality is unchangeable. Premise 2. If historical context doesn't matter and morality is unchangeable, then we can say that it is immoral for Redwan to go outside now because he could catch COVID-19 and spread it to others. Premise 3. If this is the case, then if we ever find a cure for COVID-19 in the future and the situation becomes normal, it would still be immoral for Ridwan to go outside his house because morality is unchangeable and the context doesn't matter. Conclusion. Therefore, according to Ridwan's own moral theory and in logic, he can never leave his house because it would be immoral. Also, we get our definition of morality from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet himself. So where are you getting your morality from, Ridwan? Also, why should the Muslims follow your standard of morality? But anyway, and this is so ridiculous. I mean, like, the idea that morality should be the same in all time and places. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is so ridiculous because the thing is that if that is the case, then you basically won't be able to do anything. Because imagine like any situation where, imagine there's a war, right? And people don't have anything to eat. And people ration. And the moral thing would be to ration your food, right? And that would be a moral thing to do. Now, if you follow this logic, that morality is the same all time in places, then that means that these people would have to ration foods for the rest of their lives. Because from that moment on, they cannot change their morality, despite the context. That's absurd. That's completely ridiculous. And this is not how human history works. This is not how morality works. Morality changes constantly, especially from a non-religious subjective morality or secular morality. So the idea that morality have to be applicable in all the same way in all time and places is not true. It's just absurd. Now, as a matter of fact, the thing is that the Prophet himself actually went against his tribal customs. He later preferred that people of the same age should marry each other. For example, there's a hadith which says, it was narrated from Abdullah bin Buraida that his father said, Abu Bakr and Omar, may Allah be pleased with them, proposed marriage to Fatima. But the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, she's too young. Then Ali proposed marriage to her and he married her to him. You can read about this in Sunan an-Nasai, 2221. So as we can see, even though the Prophet married Aisha at the age of 9, he later changed his position and did not advocate marrying an older man with a younger girl. Now again, if he was a pedophile, why would he do that? Regardless, let's continue.
To the next point, 4. People back then in the climate of Arabia aged much faster, so it was normal. Well, we can look at this source provided by the Museum of Menstruation and Women's Health. They have a list. I will give you the link below in the description. They have a list on the average age of the menarche in history in different regions, and it tells us that in the medieval Middle East, the menarche, which is a part of the puberty, used to be between the ages 12 and 13, usually on average. Thanks to Wiki Islam for this.
Here, Ridwan is committing the circular reasoning fallacy. He's already assuming that once someone reaches the menarche stage of puberty, they're mature, without ever justifying why that would be the case. The age of puberty varies heavily from geographical locations and person to person. Also, Wiki Islam and Ridwan was very deceptive in their article and the video. Before I say how they were deceptive, I need to explain what menstruation actually is when it comes to girls. So according to an article by Professor of Bioarchaeology, Mary Lewis, defines puberty in 5 different stages. She says puberty is divided into 5 clinical stages, with pre-puberty at stage 1 and onset or the larch at stage 2. Menarche, a girl's first period, occurs at stage 3. The age at which a child enters puberty, stage 1, varies. Today, puberty onset occurs between the ages of 10 and 14 in girls and 12 to 16 in boys. And some ethnic groups, it starts around a year earlier. Now, I want you to notice what she says here. According to her, today, puberty onset occurs between the ages of 10 to 14 in girls and 12 to 16 in boys, with some ethnic groups starting around a year earlier. Which means even today, forget 1400 years ago, girls from different ethnic groups can reach puberty of the second stage at the age of 9. Ridwan in his video quoted a study from Wiki Islam which only gives you account of the last and the final stage of puberty, which is the menarche stage. However, they completely ignored the first two stages, which is why the study gives you such high numbers. The initial first two stages of puberty happens way earlier than this. Now you might say, but isn't a girl who hasn't reached her period just a child? The answer is no, because there are many cases where a woman, even at the age of 21, have never reached her first period. There is a medical Q&A where a woman who is 21 who never had her first period asks a question to a doctor. So whether a girl has reached her first period or not has nothing to do with whether she is mature enough for marriage or not. In ancient societies, maturity in girls were usually defined by their mental stage, puberty, and pregnancy, but not necessarily when they had their periods, because according to many doctors, girls can get pregnant even when they have not reached their first period, because pregnancy depends on ovulation. In ancient societies, pregnancy was very important because people had very short lifespan. Watch my previous video on Aisha and Apostate Prophet where I go into more details on this. Also, babies had very high death rate compared to today. One study shows that in the past, nearly half of the population died just as children, which is crazy. So it was important for as young as they may have been to reproduce as soon as possible. This was the harsh reality of the time. Now, according to the same article I quoted, according to the recent archaeological research, they were able to tell when the girls in medieval societies reached their first two stages of puberty, and according to a research, the average age at which children entered puberty was the same as the most of boys and girls today, which is from either 10 to 12. But medieval teenagers took longer to reach their later milestone, including menarche. Now, obviously, this varies. This is not the same in everywhere. But regardless, we see more evidence of this historical reality from other sources as well. According to Cambridge World History of Food, Albert von Haller, who lived in 17th century, for example, claimed that girls in southerly regions of Asia, where the climate was warm, were marriageable in their 8th year and gave birth in their 9th or 10th year. Let me read that again. The girls in areas where the climate was warmer were marriageable in their 8th year and gave birth in their 9th or 10th year. Conversely, women in Arctic regions did not menstruate until age 23 to 24. This view was shared by other 18th century writers, most notably J.F. Friend, who lived in the years 1738, Hermann Boerhaave, 1744, and Montesquieu, 1751. He wrote about this in the Cambridge World History of Food, 1455. So as we can clearly see that it was normal for girls to be married and give birth in Asian countries or warmer countries as early as 8 to 10 years old in the 17th century. Now just imagine how early it would be in the 6th or 7th century in these areas where the climate was warmer. Not only that, we also see many evidence of this from our own sources as well. For example, Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan married his 9-year-old daughter Hind to Abdullah bin Amir bin Quraish. Abu al-Asim al-Dahak mentions that his mother was only 12 years older than him. He was born in the year 122 or 740, and his mother in 110, 728 to 29. Laith bin Sa'd scribed Abu Salih in the date of 223 to 837, reported that a person told him of his 10-year-old daughter who had conceived, right? A 10-year-old daughter was pregnant. Now the same Abu Saleh mentions a girl in his neighborhood conceiving at the age of 9. Al-Shafi too mentioned that women in Western Arabia reached puberty as early as 9 years of age. He also reported that in Sana'a, Yemen, he saw a 21-year-old grandmother. The same was reported from Al-Hasan bin Saleh. Now, I want you to remember one thing. When he's saying they reached puberty, he does mean menstruation. Because back then, menstruation would be the primary indicator of whether a girl has reached puberty or not. Now, this isn't always the case. It could simply also be that the girl has matured in terms of physically. However, this is one of the main indications, so we can logically conclude that Aisha radhiyallahu anha did reach puberty or menarche at the age of 9. And she herself confessed that she reached puberty at the age of 9 before she was married. So anyway, he also reported in Sana'a, Yemen, he saw a 21-year-old grandmother. I mean, can you imagine? The same was reported from Al-Hasan bin Saleh. Males too were at times married at very young age. For instance, Abdullah bin Amr bin al-As was only 12 years old younger than his father Amr. You can read about this in Ikra.org's article. The reference number is 7 to 13. So as you can clearly see, Aisha radhiyallahu anha wasn't the only one. Many of the reported cases show that many girls reached puberty and even got pregnant or married at the age of 9 to 12. This is also true in Western world as well. Now, based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan's theory, Aisha radhiyallahu anha was not mature enough for marriage because she didn't reach the age of menarche, stage of puberty, which proves that this marriage was not normal. Premise 2. If we find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see from archaeological evidence from Mary Lewis and historical evidence from Albert von Holler and Abu Saleh's testimony that it was normal in medieval and ancient societies for girls at the age of 8 to 10 to not only reach puberty of the first 2 stages but also to get pregnant at the age of 8 to 10, which indicates that they were not only mature but mature enough to be married and have children, which contradicts Ridwan's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Ridwan's theory of the marriage not being normal is proven false. Let's continue.
We can look at another hadith. This is one hadith that was narrated by Aisha herself when she was already together with Muhammad. Look at what she says. Be very careful. The Prophet was screening me with his ridda, garment covering the upper part of the body, while I was looking at the Ethiopians who were playing in the courtyard of the mosque. I continued watching till I was satisfied. So you may deduce from this event how a little girl who has not reached the age of puberty, who is eager to enjoy amusement, should be treated in this respect. She says that she had not reached the puberty yet, and she was together with Muhammad. Doesn't this tell us everything? This tells us a disgusting truth. Just let this go through your head. He married Aisha when she didn't even have her puberty yet. Can you imagine that?
This is another lie. Now, the words "she has not reached puberty yet" in the brackets does not exist in the original Arabic, as far as I can tell. Yeah, it doesn't exist in the original Arabic. Also, I don't think the word little girl is here either. Again, I could be wrong. My Arabic is not so good, but so correct me if I'm mistaken. But the word little girl is fatahun sagiratun, if I'm not mistaken. Again, forgive me for if I'm mispronouncing it. As far as I can tell, but I don't think that word is used here. Also, what's interesting is that if you take a look at the chapter heading by Imam Bukhari, it says the looking of a woman at the Ethiopians and the like. The Arabic word for woman is al-marati, which is used here. So this clear-cut shows that this hadith is talking about Aisha radhiyallahu anha when she was a woman, not when she was a prepubescent little girl. Also, this hadith is much shorter version of a much longer hadith. Here is the full version of the hadith. Narrated Aisha radiallahu anhu, Allah's Messenger came to my house while two girls were singing beside me the songs of Buath, a story about the war between the two tribes of Ansar, the Kharaj and Aus before Islam. The Prophet ﷺ lay down and turned his face to the other side. Then Abu Bakr came and spoke to me harshly, saying, "Musical instruments of Satan," near the Prophet ﷺ. Allah's Messenger ﷺ turned his face towards him and said, "Leave them." When Abu Bakr became inattentive, I signaled to those girls to go out and they left. It was the day of Eid, and the black people were playing with shields and spears. So either I requested the Prophet ﷺ or he asked me whether I would like to see the display. I replied in the affirmative. Then the Prophet ﷺ made me stand behind him, and my cheek was touching his cheek. He was saying, "Carry on, O Bani Arfida," till I got tired. Then Prophet ﷺ asked me, "Are you satisfied?" I replied in the affirmative, and he told me to leave. You can read about this in Sahih al-Bukhari, 949 to 950. Now there's a few interesting details here. If you notice, the hadith says, "Then the Prophet ﷺ made me stand behind him, and my cheek was touching his cheek." Now tell me, on what planet are prepubescent little girls so tall that they can stand cheek to cheek with a 48 to 50-year-old adult male? Anyway, so what do you think? That kids in Arabia were as tall as aliens from the movie Avatar? This is so obvious that this hadith is taking place when Aisha radiallahu anha was either a teen or an adult. This is definitely not taking place when she is a little girl and who has not reached puberty yet. Based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan's theory, Aisha radiallahu anha did not reach puberty because the hadith in Bukhari 5236 says so. Premise 2. If we find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it would be proven false. Premise 3. We see that the original Arabic of the hadith doesn't say she didn't reach puberty. Also, the chapter heading talks about women watching sport, not children. It says the word woman specifically. Also, the full version of the hadith says she stood cheek to cheek with the Prophet, which is impossible for a prepubescent girl because she'd be too short, which shows that she was either in her teen or adult phase, which contradicts Ridwan's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Ridwan's theory of Aisha radiallahu anha not reaching puberty is proven false. Now, in order to prove that Aisha radiallahu anha didn't reach puberty, the enemies of Islam and the Islamophobes have to come up with more excuses. One of these is an argument made by David the Psycho. I'll briefly touch on this argument here. This is what he has to say.
Other Muslim apologists acknowledge that Aisha was 9 years old while insisting that she had reached puberty when Muhammad took her to bed.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if he was a paedophile, what they call, yeah, he would have married Aisha at 6 and consummate and say, "Look, I don't care." The fact that he waited 3 years is because of her well-being.
The assumption here is that the only reason to postpone a sexual relationship with a child bride is that you're waiting for her to reach puberty. That's a false assumption. I would imagine that a 50-plus-year-old man might have trouble penetrating a 6-year-old girl, so he could have simply been waiting for her to grow a bit.
This is a lie. As a matter of fact, the Prophet ﷺ had no intention of consummating the marriage with Aisha until Abu Bakr himself reminded the Prophet ﷺ as to why he isn't consummating the marriage. The only reason Abu Bakr would say that is if Aisha had reached puberty. There's a hadith which says, "We then arrived at Medina, and I stayed with Abu Bakr's children, and Abu Bakr went to the Prophet. The latter was then busy building the mosque and our home around it, where he later housed his wives. We stayed in Abu Bakr's house for a few days. Then Abu Bakr asked the Prophet, 'O Messenger of God, what prevented you from consummating the marriage with your wife?' The Prophet said, 'The bridal gift, or sadaq.' Abu Bakr gave him the bridal gift, 12.5 ounces of gold, and the Prophet sent for us." You can read about this in Tabakat al-Kubra by Ibn Sa'd, volume number 8, page number 50. Also, this story is confirmed by a Sahih Hadith in Bukhari, which I quoted earlier. Narrated Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, I had seen my parents following Islam since I attained the age of puberty. Not a day passed, but the Prophet visited us both in the mornings and evenings. You can read about this in Sahih Bukhari 476. This hadith is obviously taking place in Medina before the marriage was consummated, which proves that she reached puberty before the consummation happened. Based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to David the psychopath's theory, the Prophet didn't consummate the marriage with Aisha radhiyallahu anha because he was too old to want to consummate the marriage with a 6-year-old, not because she reached puberty. Premise 2. If you find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. According to the hadith from Tabaqat al-Kubra, we see that Abu Bakr himself urged the Prophet to consummate the marriage. Since no father in their right mind would want their daughters to lose their virginity before they reach puberty, we can logically conclude that he knew that she reached puberty. Also, that this theory is confirmed by Aisha radhiyallahu anha's own testimony in Bukhari 476, in which takes place before she moved in with the Prophet, where she herself testifies that she has reached puberty, which contradicts David's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, David Wood's theory about the Prophet waiting and Aisha not reaching puberty is proven false. Regardless, let's continue.
Also, Muhammad married Aisha around the time of the Hijrah, the migration of the Muslim community from Mecca to Medina. Before the Hijrah, the Muslim community was a persecuted minority in Mecca. After the Hijrah, Muhammad was extremely busy establishing the Muslim community in Medina. Maybe he was just too busy to focus on his marriage to Aisha.
Okay, so this is a lie. So according to David, the only reason the Prophet did not consummate the marriage was because he was just busy. This is not true. In the article of Yaqin Institute, Mufti Faraz Malik actually gives an authentic timeline based on authentic Sunni sources of Aisha's marriage and related events. According to this timeline, the marriage happened just before Hijrah, 621 CE. However, they moved to Medina in the year 622. Then the whole year nothing happens. Then at the year of 623 to 624, the marriage is consummated. The same year, Battle of Badr takes place. So you're telling me that the Prophet was more busy in 621 and 622, where literally nothing happened, and then in the year of 624, when the entire Muslim community had to get ready for war, not to mention the Prophet had to constantly deal with tribal politics and get everyone ready for war, he was less busy? It doesn't make any sense for him to consummate the marriage at the year of Hijrah. It doesn't make any sense for him not to consummate the marriage at the year of Hijrah when nothing happened. Then all of a sudden, a year later, when a war is taking place, he's less busy? Again, this is a stupid argument. It's more likely that he would be less busy at the year of Hijrah and he would be more busy at the year when the war took place. But regardless, let's continue.
Those are possibilities, but a more obvious reason comes directly from the Muslim sources. Shortly after Muhammad married Aisha, she got so sick that her hair fell out. Sahih al-Bukhari, 3894. Narrated Aisha, my marriage, wedding contract, with the Prophet was written when I was a girl of 6 years. We came to Al-Madinah and we dismounted at the place of Bani al-Harith bin Khazraj. Then I got ill and my hair fell down. Later on, my hair grew again and my mother, Ruman, came to me while I was playing in a swing with some of my girlfriends. She called me and I went to her, not knowing what she wanted to do to me. She caught me by the hand and made me stand at the door of the house. I was breathless then, and when my breathing became normal, she took some water and rubbed my face and head with it. Then she took me into the house. There in the house I saw some Ansari women who said, "Best wishes and Allah's blessing and good luck." Then she entrusted me to them, and they prepared me for the marriage. Unexpectedly, Allah's messenger came to me in the forenoon, and my mother handed me over to him, and at that time I was a girl of 9 years of age. So, what was Muhammad waiting for? He was waiting for Aisha's hair to grow back. According to another passage, Muhammad only waited until Aisha's hair came down to her ears. Sunan Abu Dawud, 4935. It was narrated with another chain that Aisha said, "When we came to Al-Madinah, some woman came to me while I was playing on a swing, and my hair only came down to my ears. They took me and prepared me and adorned me. Then they took me to the Messenger of Allah, and he consummated the marriage with me when I was 9 years old." Why was Muhammad waiting to consummate his marriage to Aisha? She was bald, and Muhammad liked long hair. As soon as her hair started growing back, she was taken to Muhammad's house so that he could be a good example for Muslims everywhere.
There's simply no evidence for his claims. He quoted 2 hadith and none of them say anything about the Prophet, about why the Prophet waited 3 years. Where does it say that he waited because her hair fell out? Nowhere do we see anything like this. So this is a baseless assertion. Also, we have direct evidence to show how she reached puberty. However, David has no evidence for his claims. Also, where does it say that the Prophet likes long hair? Nowhere. So this is a baseless assertion. Regardless, let's continue.
In case there's any doubt about this, we know from Muslim sources that Aisha had not reached puberty by the time she was taken to Muhammad's house for consummation. You'll recall from our reading of Sahih Muslim 3481 that when Aisha was taken to Muhammad's house, she took her dolls with her. Why is this important? Well, aren't dolls images? Aren't images forbidden in Islam? Why was Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, the mother of the faithful, playing with forbidden images? As it turns out, prepubescent girls were allowed to play with dolls because prepubescent girls hadn't reached the age of moral accountability. But don't take my word for it. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6130. Narrated Aisha, "I used to play with dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my girlfriends also used to play with me. When Allah's messenger used to enter my dwelling place, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me." Playing with dolls and similar images is forbidden, but it was allowed for Aisha at that time as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. Playing with dolls is forbidden in Islam, but it was allowed for Aisha because she was a little girl who hadn't reached the age of puberty. In Islamic sources, if you wanted to say that a girl hadn't reached puberty, you'd simply say that she still had her dolls.
This is a lie. Okay, so the hadith he quotes, if you look at the Arabic, you'll notice that the words in brackets, "not yet reached the age of puberty," is not in the original Arabic. This is actually taken from Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's commentary. However, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani actually quotes another scholar named Al-Khattabi to make his point. However, here is the thing. The Sheikh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani follows the Shafi school of thought. In the Shafi school of thought, puberty is generally seen as when a girl has reached 15, the age of 15. Even if that person has reached pubic hair or went through her menstruation, it doesn't matter. She still would be considered to have not reached puberty. Even though from a medical point of view, she has technically reached puberty. So it could be the case that maybe he was arguing from that point of view. However, even then, he still had doubts because he said in his book, after quoting Khattabi, Al-Khattabi said this hadith proves that the playing with dolls is not like use of other images, which has been condemned. Aisha was excused in this as she had not yet reached puberty. Kanat gaira baliga. To me, however, positively stating that she had not yet attained puberty is questionable, yet possible, because by the events of Battle of Khaybar, Aisha was either exactly or just a little above or below 14. By the time Battle of Tabuk, however, she had definitely reached the age of puberty. You can read about this in Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, volume number 10, page number 527. Notice what he says. To me, however, positively stating that she has not yet reached puberty is questionable yet possible. which means he isn't certain. Again, the reason he thinks this is because he could be arguing from the premise that a girl can reach full puberty only at the age of 15. However, we know for a fact that Aisha has reached puberty from a medical point of view and from an Islamic point of view, because there's a hadith which says, when the Messenger of Allah arrived after the expedition to Tabuk or Khaybar, the narration is doubtful in regards to which battle it was, the drought raised an end of a curtain which was hung in front of her storeroom, revealing some dolls which belonged to her. He asked, "What is this?" She replied, "My dolls." Among them he saw a horse with wings made of rags, and asked, "What is this I see among them?" She replied, "A horse." He asked, "What is this that it has on it?" She replied, "Two wings." He asked, "A horse with two wings?" She replied, "Have you not heard that Solomon had horses with wings?" She said. Thereupon the Messenger of Allah ﷺ laughed so hard that you could see his molar teeth. You can read about this in Sunan Abu Dawud, 4932. This hadith is classed as Sahih by Sheikh Albani. So we can clearly see that either during or after the Battle of Khaybar or Battle of Tabuk, Aisha was still playing with her dolls. However, here's the thing. We have direct evidence which shows that Aisha reached puberty around the time of Battle of Badr, which happened long before the Battle of Khaybar or Tabuk. Battle of Badr happened near 624, where Battle of Khaybar happened either 628 or 629, and Battle of Tabuk happened at 630. The reason we know this is from the following hadith, which I already quoted in this video. It's from Bukhari 2661, and the hadith says, "So I went to the place where I used to stay, thinking that they would discover my absence and come back in my search. While in this state, I felt sleepy and I slept. Safwan bin Muttal as-Salami ad-Duaki Dhakwani was behind the army and reached my abode in the morning. When he saw a sleeping person, he came to me, and he used to see me before veiling," which means this hadith is taking place after the rule of veil have come down, which means at the time Aisha radhiyallahu anha was wearing her veil or her hijab. This gets even clearer in a longer version of the hadith quoted by Ibn Kathir, where it says, "Where I was sitting, I fell asleep. Safwan bin al-Muttal as Sulami al-Dakwani had rested during the night behind the army. Then he set out just before daybreak and reached the place where I was in the morning, where he saw the outline of a person sleeping. He came to me and recognized me, and when he saw me, as he had seen me before, hijab was made obligatory for me. When he saw me, and he said, 'Truly to Allah we belong, and truly to him we shall return.' I woke up and covered my face with my jalab or outer garment." You can read about this in Sahih al-Bukhari 4141. So as we can clearly see, she was wearing her hijab at the time. We also know when this hadith takes place, because there is one place where Aisha says, "O Mista stumbled by getting her foot entangled in her covering sheet," and on that she said, "Let Mista be ruined." I said, "What a hard word you have said. Do you abuse a man who took part in the Battle of Badr?" Now here they're talking about one of the companions of the Prophet who spread rumors regarding Aisha radhiyallahu anha. His name was Mista ibn Utata. However, here's the thing. Mista bin Utata, if you look at his biography, he wasn't just involved in the Battle of Badr. He was also participated in other major battles as well, such as Uhud, Khandak, and Khaybar. However, Aisha only mentions the Battle of Badr, which means this event is taking place right after the Battle of Badr, but before the Battle of Uhud, which takes place after the Battle of Badr. So we know Aisha was wearing hijab after the Battle of Badr. However, hijab is mandatory for women only after they reach puberty. According to Islam QA, a girl has to wear the hijab only after they reach puberty. It says, "A person is not considered to be accountable until after reaching puberty. before puberty he or she is not accountable, because the Prophet ﷺ said the pen has been lifted from three: from the child until he reaches puberty, from the sleeper until he wakes up, and from the one who has lost his mind until he recovers. You can read about this hadith in Abu Dawud 4402. Based on this, then a girl has to put on complete hijab when she reaches puberty. By the way, this is another evidence against the Islamophobes, because here the Prophet says that a child is innocent, or his burden has been lifted from the child until he reaches puberty. Now, if he is a pedophile, why would he make this law? Right? I mean, does this indicate that children are not accountable until they reach puberty? So if he's saying that children are not accountable until they reach puberty, then why would he marry a prepubescent girl? When he himself is saying that children are not accountable before puberty. Again, that doesn't make any sense. Regardless, let's continue. So based on this, then the girl has to put on a complete hijab when she reaches puberty, and this is what Islam QS says. Which means by the time of the Battle of Badr, Aisha has already reached puberty. However, this contradicts the idea that she hasn't reached puberty because she was playing with dolls around the time of Battle of Tabuk or Khaybar. So which means when she was playing with dolls in the hadith during Battle of Khaybar or Tabuk, she has already reached puberty. This is for certain. Now the question arises then, why is she playing with dolls if she did reach puberty? Well, the answer is simple. The type of doll she had was not considered haram. The only type of dolls that are considered haram in Islam are those with faces. According to Sheikh Uthaymin, with regard to those in which the shape is incomplete, in which there is only part of the limb or head, but the shape is not clear, there is no doubt that these are permissible. And these are like the dolls with which Aisha radhiyallahu anha used to play with. You can read about this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari 6130 and Muslim 2440. But if the shape is complete and it is as if you are looking at a person, especially if it can move or speak, then I am not entirely at ease with the idea of them being permissible, because this is a complete imitation of the creation of Allah. It seems that the dolls with which Aisha used to play were not like this, so it is preferable to avoid them. But I cannot say that they are definitely haram, because there are concessions granted to young children that are not granted to adults in such matters. It is natural for young children to play and have fun. They are not obliged to do any of the acts of worship, so we cannot say that they are wasting their time in idle play. But if a person wants to be safe on the safe side in such matters, he should cut off the head or hold it near the fire until it softens. Then he should press it until the features disappear. You can read about this fatwa of Sheikh Uthaymin in Majmu Fatwa by Sheikh Uthaymin. Now, if you notice, the Sheikh says that the children playing with dolls of any kind is allowed. From this, we can logically conclude that Aisha radhiyallahu anha was allowed to play with these dolls because they didn't have any clear shape or face. Another explanation is that the ruling of images came after this hadith was recorded. Imam Bayhaqi favors this opinion in his book Al-Sunan Al-Kubra. He says the prohibition of pictorial and figural representations is confirmed from the Messenger of Sallallahu from many sources. It is likely that what is accepted in the narrations of Abu Salama from Aisha radhiyallahu anha preceded the expedition of Khaybar, and that was before the forbiddance of images of representations. Then their forbiddance was after that. You can read about this in Al-Sunan Al-Kubra by Ahmed ibn Hussein al-Bayhaqi, volume number 10, page number 371. So based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to David Wood's theory, Aisha didn't reach puberty because she was allowed to play with dolls near the battle of either Khaybar or Tabuk. Premise 2. If we find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see in the hadith which takes place after Battle of Badr that In Sahih Bukhari 4141, Aisha was wearing hijab. Since girls have to wear hijab after they reach puberty, it is clear that Aisha has reached puberty before the Battle of Badr. Premise 4. Which means when she was playing with dolls or keeping dolls around Battle of Khaybar or Tabuk, she has already reached puberty because she was wearing hijab after the Battle of Badr. We also know from Sheikh Uthaymeen that playing with dolls that doesn't have any clear shape isn't haram, which shows that Aisha could keep or play with them as someone who has reached puberty, which contradicts David Wood's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, David Wood's theory about Aisha not reaching puberty because she was playing with dolls is proven false. She could still play with dolls even after she reached puberty. Let me make a second argument based on the second explanation. Premise 1. According to David Wood's theory, Aisha didn't reach puberty because she was allowed to play with dolls. Premise 2. If you find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see in the hadith which takes place after the Battle of Badr in Sahih Bukhari 4141, Aisha was wearing hijab. Since girls have to wear hijab after they reach puberty, it is clear that Aisha reached puberty before the Battle of Badr. Which means when she was playing with dolls or keeping dolls around Battle of Khaybar or Tabuk, she has already reached puberty because she was wearing hijab after the Battle of Badr. Premise 4. If this is the case, then we can logically conclude, according to Imam Bayhaqi, that the ruling of dolls and images came down after the hadith of the dolls were recorded, which contradicts David Wood's theory. Conclusion. Therefore, David Wood's theory about Aisha not reaching puberty because she was playing with dolls is proven false. Now, you can say any of these two arguments. I think they are both equally effective. Regardless, let's continue.
Muslim men can marry, have sex with, and divorce a girl all before she's reached the age of puberty. Earlier, in Surah 2, verse 228 of the Quran, Allah had revealed that if a Muslim man wants to divorce his wife, he should wait until she's gone through 3 monthly cycles, i.e. 3 monthly periods, in order to make sure that she isn't pregnant. But the question later arose, what about wives who don't have monthly cycles? How long should their husbands wait to divorce them? The Quran answers this question in Surah 65, verse 4, where it gives divorce rules for 3 categories of wives who don't have a monthly cycle. Women who don't have a monthly cycle because they're too old, girls who don't have a monthly cycle because they're too young, and women and girls who don't have a monthly cycle because they're pregnant. The verse declares that if Muslim men want to divorce girls who haven't yet reached puberty, they have to wait 3 months. The verse reads, "And those of your women as have passed the age of monthly courses, for them the iddah, prescribed period, if you have doubt about their periods, is 3 months. And for those who have no courses, i.e. they are still immature, their iddah, prescribed period, is 3 months likewise, except in case of death. And for those who are pregnant, whether they are divorced or their husbands are dead, their iddah, prescribed period, is until they lay down their burden. And whoever fears Allah and keeps his duty to him, he will make his matter easy for him." In case there's any confusion about the meaning of this verse, here are 3 classic Muslim commentaries on Surah 65, verse 4 of the Quran. Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Allah the Exalted clarifies the waiting period of the woman in menopause, and that is the one whose menstruation has stopped due to her older age. Her iddah is 3 months instead of the 3 monthly cycles for those who menstruate, which is based upon the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, c. 2228. The same for the young who have not reached the years of menstruation. Their iddah is 3 months like those in menopause. The young who have not reached the years of menstruation, i.e. prepubescent girls. Prepubescent girls. Prepubescent girls.
You are stupid. 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 And don't forget, you are stupid.
This is a lie. Just because a girl has not reached menstruation does not mean that they have not reached puberty. Here David is committing the fallacy of composition. He is taking a small part of going through puberty, which is menstruation or having a period, and acting as if it's the whole part of puberty. Again, puberty is divided into 5 different stages. Having a period or menstruation only happens in the later part of puberty, during either stage 3 or 4. According to an article on Healthline reviewed by Dr. Karen Gill, written by Rena Goldman, the second stage of puberty starts at the age of 9 or earlier. They said puberty usually starts between age 9 or 11. The first signs of breasts, called buds, start to form under the nipple. They may be itchy or tender, which is normal. Also, according to the article, girls usually get their first period around the 3rd or 4th stage of puberty. Now, many girls get their first period typically between ages 12 and 14, but it can happen way earlier. And another thing to note is that in medieval period, this usually happened way earlier. So no, David, just because they have not reached menstruation does not mean that they have not reached puberty. Also, where does it say that Muslim men can have sex with a girl who hasn't reached puberty? There's nothing in the Quran that says anything like that. So, where did you get this fairy tale from, David? Please let me know. Either way, let's continue.
Muslim sources link Allah's ruling in the Quran to Muhammad's marriage to Aisha. We read Sahih al-Bukhari 5133, but notice the chapter heading. Giving one's young children, not adults, giving one's young children in marriage is permissible. Why? By virtue of the statement of Allah, and for those who have no monthly courses, i.e. they are still immature, Surah 65 verse 4 of the Quran, and the iddah, the waiting period for a divorce, for the girl before puberty is 3 months in the above verse. And to illustrate Allah's ruling in the Quran, Bukhari quotes Aisha saying that Muhammad had sex with her when she was only 9 years old. Why would Bukhari connect this hadith to a verse of the Quran that gives permission to Muslims to have sex with prepubescent girls? It only makes sense to connect these two passages if Aisha hadn't reached puberty.
Here David is committing the false equivalence fallacy. He is trying to make it seem like Imam Bukhari connecting the Quran verse with the hadith is the same as him saying Aisha did not reach puberty, when the arguments have nothing to do with each other. Imam Bukhari is connecting the hadith to the Quran verse because of the marriage contract. He is trying to make the point that yes, parents can make marriage contract before puberty. However, that doesn't mean they can have sex before puberty. These two arguments have nothing to do with each other. Saying marriage contract is valid before puberty is not the same as saying sex is valid before puberty. Imam Bukhari never says that sex is valid before puberty. This is an obvious fallacy. Just because you are married in the legal definition does not mean you can now have sex. Also, David, why are you acting like marriage contract to prepubescent girls is news? No Muslim scholar or apologist, as far as I know, have ever said that marriage contract before puberty is not allowed. What we are saying is that sex before puberty is not allowed. The reason we say that is because we have evidence for this. The Prophet waited till Aisha reached puberty. Also, most scholars have a consensus that having sex is not allowed until the girl has reached puberty or physical maturity. According to many classical Islamic scholars, such as Ibn Battal, who writes in his Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari, the scholars agreed that it is permissible for fathers to marry off their young daughters even if they are in the cradle, except it is not permissible for their husband to consummate the marriage with them until they are prepared to safely have intercourse, which means the girl have to be mentally and physically mature. This generally means puberty, because physical maturity is what is considered puberty in the medical sense. Back then, the idea of puberty wasn't very well defined, but now we know when children first starts to mature, and it is known as puberty. So no, David, the Prophet did not have sex with a prepubescent girl. However, Islamophobes are so desperate that they don't just stop there. They have such a demonic hatred for the Prophet ﷺ that they try to make even more ridiculous arguments. These people are so obsessed to make Islam look bad that they are willing to lie, cheat, and con, and bring whatever stupid arguments they can to make Islam look bad. One of these comes from the so-called Islam critic Colin the Joker. Let's see what he has to say.
Now this next part is extremely important. In Surah 33:49 it says, "When you marry believing women, and then divorce them before you have touched them, then there is not for you any waiting period to count concerning them." So if you haven't slept with a woman, then there's no need to have a waiting period because you know that she's not pregnant. To summarize between these two ayat, waiting periods only apply in cases where sexual intercourse occurred. Waiting periods for divorce apply to prepubescent girls. Therefore, according to the Quran, sexual intercourse is allowed with prepubescent girls.
Are you stupid or something?
This is such a bad argument. Here, let me explain to you guys how to make a sound argument. So when you are making an argument, if your argument does not include true premises, it's not a sound or a good argument. In order for argument to be sound, the premises must be true. If it's based on a false premise, the conclusion will obviously be false. Here, let's use Colin as an example. Here is his argument, right? Here is his argument. Premise 1. Waiting period only apply in cases where sexual intercourse occurred, according to Surah 33:49. Premise 2. Waiting periods for divorce apply to prepubescent girls. Conclusion. Therefore, according to the Quran, sexual intercourse is allowed with prepubescent girls. Now, his first premise is obviously false. Waiting periods only apply in cases where sexual intercourse have happened with women, not with prepubescent girls. Surah 33:49 says nothing about prepubescent girls or pregnant women. The verse specifically talks about women, not children. It says, "O you who believed, when you marry believing woman," which means this ruling only applies to women and not prepubescent children. Verse 64:5 makes a clear distinction between three categories of people: old women who cannot menstruate, girls who reach menstruation stage of puberty, and women who are pregnant. It says, "And those who no longer expect menstruation among your women, if you doubt, then their period is 3 months. And also for those who have not menstruated, and for those who are pregnant." So the ruling in 33:49 only applies to the woman in these three categories. It doesn't apply to either prepubescent or post-prepubescent girls. And based on this, let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Colin's theory, Quran allows sex with prepubescent girls based on ruling from 64:5 and Quran 33:49. Premise 2. If you find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it would be proven false. Premise 3. Upon close inspection, we see that verse 64:5 applies to three categories of people, and verse 33:49 only applies to the woman category of the people, and it doesn't apply to the prepubescent category of girls, which contradicts this theory. Conclusion. Therefore, Colin's theory about Quran allowing sex with prepubescent girls is proven false. Colin has made a fool of himself again. Regardless, let's continue. Let's continue and go back to Ridwan and his stupidity.
She wanted it, and her parents wanted it too. Well, that's true. Her father was Abu Bakr, who was one of Muhammad's best friends, and he saw Muhammad as his brother. That's why he hesitated first, as mentioned before. When Muhammad told him that they are only brothers in religion and not in real, so that Aisha is lawful for him, he accepted it. Aisha was still a child. Are we saying that we take Aisha's decision to marry him, a 6-year-old girl's decision to marry him, as a serious decision? Should we do the same thing today according to Islam?
Okay, this is a very common argument that Islamophobes and critics use when discussing this issue. Oh, she was just 6. Surely she can make decisions for herself. First of all, 6th century Arabia and 21st century is not the same thing. Second of all, Aisha was clearly an exception. She was incredibly smart for her age. She memorized the Quran and memorized all of the hadith incident that took place. This shows that she was quite mentally mature for her age. I mean, I don't remember anything from when I was 6 years old, yet she gives account of what happened in perfect details. The point is, just because she was 6 and her marriage was decided by her parents doesn't mean that she had no agency in her marriage. She was given the option to leave anytime she wanted, yet she chose to stay. She loved the Prophet very dearly. Here's a few examples of how much she loved him. There's a hadith which says, narrated Aisha, the mother of believers, while she was on a journey along with Messenger of Sallallahu, she said, I had a race with him, the Prophet, and I outstripped him on my feet. When I became fleshy again, I had a race with him, with the Prophet, and he outstripped me. He said, this is for the outstripping. You can read about this in Sunan Abu Dawud, 2578. This is how much they liked each other. They would even race each other like children. They were almost like best friends, besides being husband and wife. Another hadith says, Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, on the day of resurrection, anyone whose account will be taken will be ruined, i.e. go to hell. I said, O Messenger of Allah ﷺ, may Allah make me be sacrificed for you. Doesn't Allah say, then as for him who will be given his record in his right hand, he surely will receive an easy reckoning. He replied, that is only the presentation of the accounts, but he whose record is questioned will be ruined. You can read about this in Sahih Bukhari 4939. Here we can clearly see that Aisha radiallahu anhu loved the Prophet so much that she was even willing to be sacrificed for him. Not just that, Aisha radiallahu anhu even yelled at him from time to time, and after that they made up and laughed together. There is a hadith which says Abu Bakr came and asked permission to enter upon the Prophet, and he heard Aisha radiallahu anhu raising her voice to the Messenger of Allah. He gave him permission to enter, and so he entered and said, O daughter of Ruman, and he grabbed her. Do you raise your voice to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu? The Prophet separated them, and when Abu Bakr left, the Prophet sallallahu started saying to her to make her feel happy, do you see now how I intervened between the man and you? He said, then Abu Bakr came and asked for permission to enter upon him, and he found him laughing with her. Permission was given to him, and he entered, and Abu Bakr said to him, O Messenger of Allah, make me a partner in your peace as you made me a partner in your war. You can read about this in Ahmad in Musnad 341 to 342. The commentators said its isnad is sahih according to the conditions of Muslim. Now the truth is she loved the Prophet and chose to stay with him. This is the truth. So the idea that she had no agency in the marriage is completely false. Let me make an argument. Premise 1. According to Ridwan's theory, Aisha was 6 when she married, which shows that she had no agency in her marriage. Premise 2. If you find any evidence that contradicts this theory, it will be proven false. Premise 3. We see that Aisha never spoke ill of the Prophet, never left his side, and even when she was given the chance as an adult. This shows that she chose to stay even as an adult, which contradicts Ridwan's theory. Also, we see many hadith tradition where she shows how much she loved him. Conclusion. Therefore, Ridwan's theory about Aisha having no agency in the marriage is proven false. She loved the Prophet and she chose to stay even as an adult. Now, some may argue that, well, she was suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. There is a great argument from Badr Osama Misri regarding this. In case you're not familiar with his channel, definitely go and subscribe to his channel. I'll post the links below. He says, there is an argument that Hazrat Aisha suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, which doesn't make any sense. Stockholm Syndrome symptoms, a person who develops Stockholm Syndrome often experiences symptoms of post-traumatic stress, nightmares, insomnia, flashback, and a tendency to startle easily, confusion, and difficulty trusting others. Aisha didn't suffer from any of this, all of those symptoms, and she went to the Battle of Jamal to make sure that this battle was stopped. It takes guts and extreme amount of courage for her to do this. She wasn't confused about teaching Islam to Muslims. When she learned from the Prophet ﷺ, she was very confident to teach them and help, etc. And one more thing, why didn't Hazrat Aisha attempt to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when she received so many golden opportunities if she really hated him? I mean, all of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's wives didn't do that too. That's because they didn't suffer from Stockholm syndromes. They also encouraged Muslims to fight the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it means that they were grateful, thankful, and happy to be with him. And they also loved him as well. So it's impossible for her to suffer from them. Regardless, let's continue.
She says, I used to play with dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my girl friends also used to play with me. When Allah's apostle used to enter, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me. A grown-up 18-year-old girl plays with dolls? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, I play video games and I'm a 27-something male. Plenty guys nowadays have action figures. So, I mean, even your buddy David Wood has toys in his background. Does that now mean he's a prepubescent boy? Regardless, let's continue.
Well, Muhammad was a bit sick, but apparently he covered this whole thing up as a divine mission. This is again narrated by Aisha. According to this hadith, Muhammad said the following words, "You were shown to me twice in my dream before I married you. I saw an angel carrying you in a silken piece of cloth. And I said to him, uncover her. And behold, it was you. I said to myself, if this is from Allah, then it must happen." A divine mission to marry a little girl.
Yes, good job, Redwan. You just refuted yourself. In Islam, we Muslims believe in the divine command theory. In case you guys don't know, the divine command theory is a meta-ethical theory which proposes that an action status as morally good is equivalent to whether it is commanded by God. The theory asserts that what is moral is determined by God's command, and that for a person to be moral, he has to follow God's commands. Followers of both monotheistic and polytheistic religions in ancient and modern times have often accepted the importance of God's command in establishing morality. For Muslim, what God commands is good. If He forbids something, then it's evil, because God is all-knowing. So His command comes from ultimate knowledge and wisdom, which means it's not a matter of opinion or debate, but a fact. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the Prophet Muhammad to marry Aisha, then this is good, which completely undermines Ridwan's attempt to try to make it look bad to Muslims.
We even have another source here in which Muhammad gives another companion the advice to marry young girls the way he himself did. This hadith is narrated from the perspective of Jabir, a companion of Muhammad. He said, "Did you marry a virgin or a matron?" I replied, "A matron." He said, "Why didn't you marry a young girl so that you may play with her and she with you?" Well, it's very obvious to me. Again, the word Sahih means authentic, and the vast majority of Sunni Muslim believers believe in these sources.
Again, the hadith doesn't say anything about prepubescent girls or children. Young girl doesn't mean children. Actually, Brother Zaid al-Iraqi, or Bringer Proof, actually made a great response to this hadith. I'll play a clip from his video. In case you're not familiar with his channel, definitely go and subscribe. I'll put the links below. You can find all the sources in his video pinned in the description. The brother is very underrated and he is doing great work, mashallah, so definitely check him out.
Nevertheless, let's actually now explain what the word means. Quote, "A husband must increase the chance for harm by being playful and joking with her, since it is something that women heart desire, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, was playful with his wives, and goes down in their level in acting and manners." Quote, "In it is that it is preferable for the marriage of young ones on the reward being higher. And it is that the man must be playful with his woman and being nice to her and make her laugh and have a good relationship." Quote, and his saying, وَلَعِبُوهَا is a source for la'ib, which means playful and playing. As we say, qatil is fighting and fight. Quote, and his saying playful with her and she with you, from playing and is known and similar to make her laugh and make you laugh, and saying to Abu Ubaid, who narrated being playful with her and she with you, from being joyful and fun. And that is how Al-Qadi Iyadh stated it, from the majority of those who speak in this hadith, and some who said it possibly means saliva. So what is the narration that is cited by Sahih Muslim, and why did not IC show it? Well, in fact, the Prophet explained it and explained what the word means in the hadith. Jabir bin Abdullah reported, Abdullah died and he left behind him 9 or 7 daughters. I married a woman who had been previously married. Allah Messenger said to me, Jabir, have you married? I said yes. He again said, a virgin or one previously married. I said, Messenger of Allah, with who has previously married. Whereupon he said, why didn't you marry a younger so you can sport with her and she sports with you? Or you could amuse with her and she could amuse with you. You can read the rest of the hadith. You can pause the screen and read the rest of the hadith yourself. The word amuse is tudahikak, which literally means laughter. So we just explain what this means. As you can see above, Al-Qadi stated the majority of those who speaks in this hadith on this sharh, which means that those who explain it say this is about being joyful, not sexual intercourse.
With that, I'm done with Ridwan the Clown. Also, I'm done with any accusation of pedophilia and child marriage on this channel. For now, at least anyway. This topic is done, at least for now. It's finished.
You're finished. You're finished. You're finished. You're finished. Wallahi, you're finished.
I don't want to see any comment regarding this. However, before I finish the video, I want to share a hadith with you guys. Here, Aisha radhiyallahu anha tells us who the Prophet really was. The hadith says, Aisha radhiyallahu anha reported that Allah's Messenger ﷺ never beat anyone with his hands, neither a woman nor a servant, but only in the case when he had been fighting in the cause of Allah, and he never took revenge for anything unless the things were made unviolable by Allah were made violable. Which means when people broke the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he then took revenge for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and exalted the glorious. You read about this in Sahih Muslim 2328. This is who our Prophet was. A man who never hurt anyone, unless as a judge punishing the guilty, or as a warrior fighting for the rights of others. This is who he really was, a hero, a good man, a good husband, a good leader. Not a pedophile, not a warlord, not some monster. A hero to his people, a hero to humanity. A true hero chosen by God. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him above anyone else. This is why these hate preachers and ex-Muslims and other Islamophobes who keeps lying about the Prophet will never succeed, inshallah. Because the truth is that when the truth comes, you guys will be exposed for the miskin that you are, for the cockroach that you are, for the liar that you are, for the hater that you are. Remember, when the truth comes, your falsehood will perish. Anyway, with that I'm done. If any Muslim or non-Muslim brings these accusations about pedophilia or child marriage, forward them this video. This topic is done for now. So, sorry for the long response, but this needed to be done. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And share the video. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.